You may have already heard what people fear more than death, which is public speaking. It reminds me of the first time I had a significant public speaking event, where this was back in the days when I was working with Dr. Mercola in the Chicagoland area. And literally just 2 days before an event, he had asked me if I could do speaking at an event coming up in the next Saturday. And it was supposed to be a smaller, not a primary speaking room, but one of the smaller rooms in a smaller event. Yet, on the day of the event, there was word that I was from Dr. Mercola's office. So yes, it was a smaller room, but the smaller room was not only jam-packed with people sitting, but by the time that actual speech or that lecture workshop started, it was actually standing room only, with people lining the back of the room and the sides of the room. So you can imagine how I felt at that point. And from a perspective of, sometimes it's not always big speaking events. Sometimes you could think of being in an interview, going in for an interview for a job that's very important for you, yet often it can be very difficult to have the right communication for you to nail that job because of that nervousness. So sometimes the public speaking is just one-on-one and not one-on-many. And thinking about my first time ever when I had what I would call a public speaking event was all the way back when I was in kindergarten. And I remember this like it was yesterday, where everybody in the room had to get together and they put the chairs in a circle. And one by one, each person from the outer circle had to sit in the middle chair and sit in the chair and say their name and a little bit about themselves so the group could get to know each other. So all of these examples of public speaking are why it's so important to be able to speak in this way. And remember, public speaking is not just one-to-many. Sometimes it's one-to-one. And so why do we need to hone this skill? Why do we need to be good at this? Is because it's what we use in everyday life. It's a part of our relationships, friendships, intimate relationships, work relationships. As I mentioned earlier, it's a part of interviewing for a new job. If you have meetings at work, whether it's a meeting with one or two other people or a handful of people in a meeting room. If you're in the customer service industry and you're dealing with customers on a regular basis, you're public speaking all the time. And of course, where most people think of public speaking, tied into larger speaking events. Now, these could be events of maybe 5 or 10 people, up to 5,000 people, or even so many more. And the other aspect that I feel is so important with really knowing how to speak publicly is really also tied into your health. You see, I've been in the health industry for 19 years professionally, and probably about 3 decades, when I include my own personal journey. And I could tell you one of the single biggest factors of why people get sick is because they internalize their own voice. So we don't even have the ability to typically share what's important to us. So public speaking has a health aspect as well. So the big what if question: what if you don't ever really learn how to speak publicly? Again, whether it be sharing your own one-on-one communication or in larger groups. So what this really means for you is it ends up being a space of poor communication or incomplete communication, where you feel that you've communicated but the other person just didn't hear you, they didn't get it, or they didn't comprehend it. Or tied into that, that low comprehension. That's one of the bigger things to actually understand, is that when you're speaking, you want to have that ability to be sure that you're tapping into that other person's subconscious mind so they comprehend what you're getting on a very deep level. You also want to recognize that another what if for a lack of public speaking is just poor engagement, where you don't have people's attention, and when you don't have their attention, they're not listening and they're not comprehending. And also, as mentioned, a basic lack of healthy expression of your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own words, which impacts you far beyond any kind of a public speaking aspect. So if you really want to learn how to really public speak in a way that allows you to have awesome communication, complete communication, a very high level of comprehension, high levels of engagement, and to be able to express yourself in a very healthy way, I would recommend Michael Stevenson's course and workshop called Speaking to Profits. This is an intensive course to break down your ability to speak from the most easiest way possible up to the most advanced level so you can get the needs that you need and you desire from a public speaking aspect. So be sure to click on the link on this page to learn more about Michael Stevenson's speaking workshop. And I'm going to be attending myself personally. So as you join this workshop, we'll enjoy working on this together. And going back to what I had talked about earlier, remember that first day of school when I was a kindergartner? Now, most people know me as somebody who's definitely not afraid to speak and to get out in the public, whether it be small groups or extremely large groups. And to be honest with you, the larger the group, the more exciting and the better it is for me. But that first day of school when I was a kindergartner, getting in that middle chair sitting around all the other children, I did nothing but cry. I couldn't even get my name out. I couldn't express myself. I couldn't share anything about myself because I was so afraid, just beyond the basis of fear at that age. And from the job interview perspective that I mentioned, when you have these skills can be invaluable for you from a life and a career perspective and even from a financial perspective, because the ability to be able to communicate in a complete way, in a comprehensive way, with high engagement, allows you to land what's most important to you from a career and a financial perspective. And lastly, that day when I got to that Mercola event, which I thought was going to be a small event in a small room, and it was not one of the primary events of the day, but it ended up that the room was just completely packed with people, standing room only. The back of the room was filled. The sides of the room were filled. Yet, the more people that poured in, the happier I was, the more at ease I was, and the more excited I was, because I've already been trained in speaking in a way that allows me to follow very simple formats and gives me the confidence that the more people, the better. Because more people means I'm going to communicate with more, I'm going to communicate more completely, and I'm going to communicate with a lot more comprehension and engagement, because that's what I've learned in my training with Michael Stevenson.